Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. The numbers are in on the 2019 maple sugaring season. And to no one's surprise, Vermont takes the top spot for maple syrup production in the United States. What is surprising is Vermont sugar makers made more maple syrup in less time this year than in any year in history. In a few minutes, we'll go inside the numbers to understand why production is rising. First, let's meet the next generation of sugar makers who took part in a first-of-its-kind maple competition. Keith Silva has our story.
Vermont ranks as the #1 maple syrup producer in the United States. So it should come as no surprise this Maple CDE, or Career Development Event, is the first competition of its kind to take place, ever. Students from technical high schools and Vermont FFA members competed in both individual and team events to find out who's got the sweetest skills when it comes to maple.
I think I did fairly well. There was some now kind of challenging, mostly with the grading, but we practice it quite a bit at school, so I think I did fairly okay on that.
Boudreau is a senior at Missisquoi Valley Union High School. If he's learned one lesson from his time as a sugar maker, it's this: quality counts.
Having that good syrup come out and have that good tasting syrup that everyone in Vermont loves, it pays off, and it's just a good experience to have.
Mark Wild is Boudreau's teacher. He brought his class here to test their skills, and Wild hopes the students will learn something about themselves.
First, I hope they have fun. You know, I have been teaching now for almost 37 years, and the reason I have been in it is because I've had a lot of fun teaching, and I try to instill a sense of fun while working hard in my program back at the school. But I also hope these students do well, of course, and that they realize that maybe if they thought they knew it all, there's a little bit more that they can learn, and if they study a little harder next time around, they'll do even better.
One event tested the students' skill to install tubing. They had to run a sap line from a tree and use various fittings to make sure their installation could conduct sap, or in this case, water. Tristan DeGraff, a senior at the Center for Technology in Essex, was up for the challenge.
I learned how to work on lines, because maybe I might run like some lines myself next year. Who knows?
The opportunity that this event provided for students was the reason Tristan's teacher wanted to get involved.
It shows how our students kind of stood next to their peers around the state, but also kind of it was a good check for me to see how we're instructing them, if they're getting the same information as other students. And I was able to take a lot of material back with me to prepare more for next year, I think, for the few things that maybe we don't cover as well.
The Maple CDE came about because teachers like Schatzer and Wild wanted to find a new way to challenge students while showing them potential career options in maple production. So they got together with UVM Extension's maple specialist, Mark Isselhart.
Good luck.
I started looking at what maple is right now, and it's a career for people. People can go right out of high school and get a job and either start their own operation or join an operation. And the idea that we've learned a lot in the last 20, 25 years about maple production, I wanted to try to get some of that research-based knowledge in students' hands. So those conversations with the instructors led to the idea that maybe it's time for a standalone maple event.
Let's just have Vermont lead the way.
Lynn Wolf is a graduate student in the Ecological Planning program at UVM's Rubenstein School. She planned and organized the Maple CDE as part of her thesis.
With that, this was actually going to at first be a very minor component of my project, and it sort of ballooned to be a more major component. But it really stemmed from teachers reaching out to Mark and saying, you know, look, we don't have enough resources, especially up-to-date resources, to teach our students what we're hoping to teach them, like the skills and knowledge they need to know to do this unit and then potentially get a job in the maple industry.
Wolf believes she's tapped into a good idea and hopes to expand this event.
Once we have it sort of dialed in, then we're certainly going to reach out to other maple producing states that have FFA chapters and see if they would like to have a maple CDE too, because then if you have multiple states, then the states can compete against each other eventually.
For Mark Wild, giving students an experience like this is what a technical education is all about.
So in tech ed, we have a responsibility to prepare students for life after high school, namely the world of work. And many of these students do plan a career in the natural resources, environmental sciences areas. And so it's important that they understand the requirements of industry in terms of knowledge and expectations.
As someone who will be working with these future foresters and sugar makers, Isselhart is already impressed.
It's a great thing to see students who are, on the younger side, the youngest sugar makers potentially, being exposed to all the different elements of sugaring. It's not just drilling a hole in a tree and walking away. It's not just turning on the RO. It's all those things integrated. And it says a lot about, I think, the state of Vermont, that we have 30 to 50 kids who are here prepared, knowledgeable, and know what they're doing.
This first annual Maple CDE is further proof that when it comes to maple, Vermont is second to none. In Shelburne, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
That's exciting. And congratulations to all those students who take part in the Maple Career Development event. And in the studio, we now have Mike Isselhart, who was out there with them. So what kind of careers are we talking about that students might take on after high school?
Sure. So maple has grown quite a bit in Vermont, and what historically might have been a family activity on the farm or a few individuals who were really passionate about maple, now individuals can start their own business and make a decent amount of money from it. Maybe not their full year-round job,
right.
But if they choose so and they're very passionate, they can definitely go in and either join an existing operation or start their own.
That's so exciting, and now they know stuff. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture statistics are out for the 2019 maple season. How much syrup did Vermont make, do you think, and how much of an increase were we seeing?
Sure. So the numbers from the USDA are part of a volunteer survey that comes out annually, and producers fill out the survey, they send in the information, and the USDA aggregates it. The estimates are 2 million gallons of syrup was produced in Vermont. That's just under 50% of all the syrup made in the U.S., so a huge amount of syrup. We did see a lot of that increase from last year was due to increase in taps. So there was about a 6% increase in the number of taps in Vermont, and a very slight increase in the overall yield per tap. So that had to do with the sugaring weather, but also some reports of sap sweetness being a little higher this season.
Interesting. So certainly, if the taps are increasing, is this a trend? Is this going to continue to happen? So more taps making more syrup in less time.
Right. So each season is typically a little different in the duration or the number of ideal sap flow days. But when you have more taps, typically you'll make more syrup, and technology can certainly help increase the yield.
Well, what kind of technology are we talking about that has also made a difference in these numbers?
So there's technology that impacts production, the overall amount of sap you get for every tap you put in, and that would be vacuum and tubing. There's a very linear relationship. The higher the vacuum you put on a tap hole, the more sap you get. And then there are things that are more on the efficiency side of producing syrup. So reverse osmosis, where you can eliminate a lot of the water in your sap before you have to boil it. That's something that allows fewer people to run operations, be more efficient, lower labor costs, more profitability.
Right. So are some of these technologies, especially the vacuuming, how is that affecting the syrup or the trees? Is it changing either one of those things?
So, I mean, tubing originally was invented not to increase production, but as a labor-saving device so that people didn't have to go to every tree and empty a bucket. Right. And then this was in the 50s, and then the materials matured enough so that people realized you could put vacuum on and increase production. And there's been a fairly steady increase in vacuum intensity ever since. We are about 6 years into a long-term study at the Proctor Maple Research Center looking at the impacts. And it's too soon to say with any 100% certainty, but we are interested in that question of what is the impact of high vacuum versus more modest, gravity type sap collection, and comparing it to no tapping, because you want to have a control in order to see differences.
Because the numbers, I mean, it wasn't really a great season. It was actually about two weeks and a little bit more less than before, and yet we have so much more syrup.
Yeah, season duration doesn't always correlate with total syrup production. In other words, just because a season is 60 days long doesn't mean you're going to have twice as much syrup as a season that's 30 days long. It's how many ideal sap flow days that you've all learned it probably in school, the freezing and thawing. How many of those can you have in a season will impact how much syrup you produce.
Right, so interesting. So does all this technology mean the end to the old-fashioned bucket and pour it out of the bucket?
No, you can definitely, that is still a legitimate technology for collecting sap. It just becomes an issue of efficiency. If you really get bitten by the maple bug, it's hard to tap more than a couple of thousand buckets in one operation before the labor is just crippling.
Right,
So we don't have as many large farm families that we used to, and so people have other jobs to earn their main source of income, and people can do tubing and vacuum and do it as a side thing in the spring.
Thank you for joining us
All
today.
right, take care.
And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.